For over a century, horror movies have been so much more than just a cheap thrill. They're like this dark, distorted mirror, reflecting our deepest, darkest anxieties right back at us. So today, we're going to trace the evolution of fear on film and discover how the monsters on screen tell us everything we need to know about the real monsters in our world. And this quote right here, it just gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? See, horror isn't some static thing. What terrified our great-grandparents might seem kind of quaint to us now, and that's because our fears have changed. The whole genre is basically a cultural barometer, showing us exactly what a society is afraid of at any given moment. So, what are we really talking about when we say horror film? Well, it's a movie that's designed from the ground up to create this really intense emotional experience. It's not just about a monster jumping out of a closet, right? It's about building suspense, it's about exploring those mysteries, and tapping into our most fundamental fears, of the dark, of the unknown, and maybe most of all, of what lies hidden inside our own minds. Alright, so to really get a handle on the complex horror we see today, let's take a journey back in time through 4 key eras. We'll kick things off at the very beginning with the birth of cinematic fear. Then we'll meet those classic monsters, witness the exact moment the monster became human, and finally, we'll explore how horror is now being used as some seriously powerful social commentary. Okay, our story starts way back in the silent era, in the earliest days of movie making, when filmmakers were just figuring out the magic of using a moving image to bring the impossible to life right there on screen. Now, what's really fascinating here is that the very first horror film wasn't actually meant to be scary. Georges Méliès, he was an illusionist, a magician, and for him, film was just a new kind of magic trick. His movie, The House of the Devil, was packed with bats and ghosts and devils, but the goal was to amaze the audience, to make them wonder, not to terrify them. It was a crucial first step for sure, but it really took the trauma of a world war to give horror its soul. And this is where we see a huge shift. After World War I, Germany was grappling with this immense collective trauma, so filmmakers harnessed that anxiety, and they created a visual style to match it. In movies like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, those jagged sets and creepy, distorted shadows weren't just stylistic choices. They were a visual representation of a fractured national psyche. This is where horror learned to create a mood of pure, unsettling dread. Now let's jump over to the 1930s, where Hollywood took those German influences and spun them into an entire universe of iconic monsters that would pretty much define horror for decades to come. With the arrival of sound, everything changed. Universal Studios basically unleashed this rapid-fire succession of monster movies that were absolute blockbusters. It all kicked off with Dracula and Frankenstein in '31, and from there they just established a formula. They became the horror studio, building this pantheon of monsters that are still household names today. And behind these monsters were some real visionaries. You had directors like Todd Browning and James Whale, and of course the iconic actors who brought them to life. Bela Lugosi's hypnotic Dracula was this terrifying foreigner, but it was Boris Karloff who did something truly revolutionary with Frankenstein's monster. And here's the brilliant leap forward. The monster wasn't just a monster anymore. James Whale and Boris Karloff created what we now call a sympathetic monster, a creature that was both terrifying and tragic. This tapped into these deep-seated anxieties about science playing God, and it forced audiences to ask, wait, who is the real monster here? It was a massive, massive step in the genre's complexity. But as the world changed, so did the monsters. After World War II and the dawn of the atomic age, the fear wasn't about some ancient curse from a Gothic castle anymore. It was about nuclear annihilation. And in Japan, these anxieties took a very tangible form in 1954 with Godzilla, a giant monster literally born from radiation, symbolizing the terrifying, destructive power humanity had just unleashed on itself. This brings us to a seismic shift in the history of horror. A moment that completely changed the game. In the 1960s, the source of our fear was about to make a very short and very terrifying trip. The threat was no longer some external other, some creature from a faraway land or a forgotten time. The new monster looked just like us. And the film that blew the doors wide open was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. This was the moment horror turned inward. The monster wasn't supernatural, it was psychological. Psycho proved that you didn't need castles or creatures to be absolutely terrifying. The most disturbing horrors could be found right behind the friendly smile of a quiet motel owner. So you can see the difference pretty clearly here. Classic horror was all about an external physical threat, something you could see and fight. But psychological horror, it exploits our own vulnerabilities. It relies on our internal conflicts, and this is the key, the anticipation of a threat. The fear comes from what we imagine is about to happen, which is almost always worse than anything we actually see. This whole psychological turn paved the way for the slasher boom of the 70s and 80s, and with it came this simple, brutal, and terrifyingly effective formula. You had a relentless, usually masked killer, a group of teens, and those terrifying point-of-view shots that put you right in the killer's shoes. And it all ended with the final girl, the lone survivor who had to face the monster. And this wasn't happening in a vacuum. The rise of the slasher film lined up perfectly with a brand new cultural fear, the serial killer. News reports were bringing these real-world monsters into people's living rooms every night. Films like Halloween and Friday the 13th took that fear and put it in the safest places imaginable, the suburbs, a summer camp, and in doing so, they proved that nowhere was truly safe anymore. Which brings us to today. Right now, horror has evolved into one of the most powerful genres for dissecting complex, uncomfortable truths about our modern world. I mean, the contrast is just stark. Where classic horror gave us these clear-cut battles of good versus evil with external monsters, modern horror tackles the insidious evil of entire societal systems. It often trades cheap jump scares for this pervasive sense of dread, and it fully embraces moral ambiguity, leaving us to question who we should really be afraid of. And modern filmmakers are using the genre to confront our biggest societal nightmares head-on. Jordan Peele's masterpiece, Get Out, uses horror to explore the terrifying reality of systemic racism. You have films like Hereditary that dive into the horror of grief and inherited trauma. The monster is no longer a single person or a creature, it's the very fabric of society itself. And the industry has absolutely taken notice. Independent studios like A24 and Neon are championing what a lot of people call elevated horror. They're treating the genre with the artistic respect it deserves, proving that a film can be a terrifying experience and a piece of prestige cinema that wins major awards. They've made horror cool, smart, and totally impossible to ignore. So as we've seen, horror has always been our mirror. It gives our fears a real, tangible form, which allows us to confront them in the controlled safety of a movie theater. The monster has constantly evolved, from a supernatural ghost to a masked killer in our neighborhood, and now to the oppressive systems we all live within. It's a dark reflection, yeah, but it's a necessary one. Which leaves us with one final kind of unsettling question. As our world keeps changing, bringing new anxieties about technology, the climate, social division, what new shapes will our nightmares take on screen? What monsters are we creating right now?